All right, welcome everybody. My name is Tom Pendleton. I'm the oldest son of Joe and Skip Pendleton, and we're all very happy to have you here with us tonight. We know our parents had a big impact and were very involved in the community, and we know that people wanted to come together, we felt, and have an opportunity to celebrate their lives. Thank you all for being here. So I just wanted to say that originally we were thinking about having this celebration for Dad, and then sadly, my mom passed last week, which I think many of you read in the journal, the obit, or word travels fast in this community. So we really said, they were together for 65 years as a married couple, and they actually knew each other. They almost grew up across the street from each other. So they spent all their lives practically together, and so it's not surprising when this happens that people pass together. My mom had been suffering for a number of years anyway, but you never think it's going to be right now. You think it's going to be in the future, but so it's all come. So tonight we're here to celebrate both Mom and Dad, which is really appropriate because they really were a tight pair who did a lot together. What we're going to have some family reflections, and then we've invited some of their friends that kind of reflect different aspects of their lives to talk, and then we're going to have an opportunity for people to come up and share their stories, their reflections, something about Mom and Dad. We know that there's a lot of people here, and there's probably a lot of people that want to talk, so please be considerate that we want to allow as many people as possible to have an opportunity to share. We are going to start at 5:45. We've invited Heart Song to come and sing, so we're going to try to stick to that at 5:45. We'll put an end to the formal conversation up here, let them do some songs, and then we're going to have the potluck dinner and dancing. But all of you are here, and please share your stories with one another and keep the conversation going. So thank you all very, very much for all you did also for all of us during my dad and mom's illness, and we really appreciate it. Thank you.
Well, welcome again for coming. I think all of you know who I am. I'm Denise, the middle child. That was Tommy, my big brother. And this has certainly been an intense last few months. My mother has been suffering with her palsy for a couple of years, and then my father's rapid decline started in July. So it's been quite an intense 4 or 5 months. It's been a time of giving to my parents and receiving new unexpected gifts from them that emerged from the intimate acts of caregiving to parents, each with an exceptionally strong life spirit. Yet, on their way to crossing over to the land of milk and honey, the great cosmos, where, as a friend wrote to me, a beautiful love story continues. We received so many wonderful cards, sharing stories and memories, and these months of hearing community members' stories has helped me to know my parents in new ways. I will be reading a few bits and pieces from people I know who cannot be here, and I thank you for giving me this opportunity to share with you my experience of my parents. Of course, I could go on and on about that, and I've tried to limit it to about 7 minutes. That's according to my timing, just to let you know what you're in for. There are many gifts I could name that each of them have left me. For my dad, there are his strong sense of duty, his devotion to reading and ideas and the great outdoors, and his desire to connect to community, which I know others here will speak about later. I just wanted to share with you briefly a dear friend of my father's who could not make it, Dave Smith, just a paragraph from a letter. He made an effort to hand deliver it to the mailbox, hoping I could share the whole thing, but I'm just going to share one paragraph. He says that the story starts with Joe, who invited Linda, Dave's wife, and I over for dinner. Linda was fairly new to Belfast. I knew Joe from school. This was around 1984. Joe and Skip became part of our lives. Joe was ever present with boundless energy and friendly involvement. Skip turned out to be a sort of lifesaver. In the late 90s, our son Andy encouraged me to build a skate park in Belfast. This turned out to be a project that was far more difficult than I had imagined. I remember communicating that I was having a hard time keeping up my energy for the skate project, and Skip said, "I'll help you," and he did. From that day on, we were a team, and the job got done. And I know all of you have versions of that story about my dad stepping in, stepping up to the plate, and making things happen. But the one thing that stands out for me about my father, most of all, that I've been thinking about, is his ability to change and grow, as if he were shedding layers and trying on different identities. In the family, it was a common joke among us to ask, "What do you think Skip's next thing will be? A DJ for WERU or Belfast radio? Perhaps someday he'll discover yoga and become a yogi, stretching himself into pretzel shapes." I'm disappointed that never quite got there for him. Some of you know him through all these pursuits, how he went from being the father who took us to church every Sunday when hunting and fishing and maintaining a farm, to becoming a nut about skiing and sailing, then even being an actor on stage. But through it all, one thing that was constant was that he always read with an insatiable curiosity. And the book that was in his walker, and the last book I saw him reading about 2 days before he passed, was Nietzsche's Thus Spoke Zarathustra. Little light reading at the end. For my mom, it's her love of beauty in the natural world, in arts and crafts and language, and the special radiance she had, an optimism so great that, unlike most of us, she loved the month of November most of all, for its trees laid bare and the beauty of the dark skies. So I think it's fitting that she passed in this month. Her eternal optimism was coupled with a great openness about people. And this is reflected in a note from Laura Baker. My mother worked for a while with Laura and Bernie Baker in the special education program. And Bernie and Laura wrote a 2-page typed letter that I won't read to you, but this one paragraph when they heard about Mom. "Thank you, Joe. You taught me how to play with children, how play was an essential part of living. When we had a student who had many behavioral issues, who had never been really with other children, you said, 'Let's put him on the slide.' Up he went, with you behind him, prodding him along. He came down the slide between your legs. It was the first time I saw him smile. This changed his life. It changed mine. In fact, it saved his life. He wanted to go out at recess to play with others. His behaviors changed. He became a kid. He became safe. Throughout the year, you took him and others on the swings, brought in leggings, and took them sledding. Your energy, your smiles, your laughter were everywhere." So I have 2 poems, one for my mother and one for my father. Travels with my father. We never left the state of Maine, but there were the occasional Sunday drives, all 4 or 5 of us piled into the VW, curious to see where you would take us. Once, we visited the artist from church who lived far out in the country, alone in a plain house in a bare field, his self-portrait still on your wall. The 2 bicyclists, young men on a long-distance ride who we came across in the hours of dusk, and you pulled off the road to chat and offer them our field to set up their tent in, because this was in the 1960s, and they were as rare a sight as you who rode your bicycle to work every day. When you gave up church, we traveled with you, climbing into the cold minivan to ride 3 hours to Enchanted Mountain, sometimes the snow swirling thick against the windshield, the road becoming a blur, and you driving on through it so we could ski all day in the cold wind before driving home. Trying to keep up with you as you set off to walk the perimeter of Monhegan Island after a day of too many of us sailing together on the 27-foot Bristol, you disappear and we go on, trusting you'll be back on the boat when we need you there. Untouchable, yet touching me with the mystery of the public Skip, the private Skip. Who did you talk to about your solitary journeys to countries you visited every night between the covers of books by and about Nietzsche, Melville, Joseph Conrad, Jung, Freud, Robertson Jeffers, Wendell Berry, and then the complete works of Shakespeare that you read several times? All the poets and writers and thinkers you read again and again, trying to understand, who are we? Why are we here? You are gone now and taken with you my anger, replaced it with sadness for the conversations we never had. You had come to a trail you could not walk, where no amount of thrashing about could make the way clear for you from the hospital bed we had moved into your bedroom. For 65 years, you shared a bigger bed together with your wife, and in the final weeks when you were no longer hiking miles every day or even able to walk to the mailbox, you would reach your hands out to each other across the bed. Even when the rest of your body couldn't move without our help, without our touching you who didn't know how to hug your children, you who opened your heart in a miraculous late life blooming of tender caregiving for our mother. And now I am filled with wonder and gratitude that warms my heart into opening more than I had ever thought possible. And for my mom, one day at a time. Your gifts to me were as plentiful as the stars in the sky. As your teenage daughter, I railed against your phrase, one day at a time, thinking, how phony, what a cop-out. Why doesn't she scream out at the injustice, the hardships of her life? Because I remembered you resting your head atop the pile of diapers you were folding, closing your eyes to rest. I remembered you stepping outside to the clothesline, hanging diaper after diaper in the cooking, the cleaning, the endless chores that ruled every day. But now I am grateful for how you are helping me to see the wonder and beauty of the world when we are truly in the day we've been given. Because when you stepped out to the clothesline, you were living in the moment of looking at the sky, the fields, the woods below, and being lifted up by the sighting of birds, by their songs, by the shape of a tree's branches against the changing sky. But even from inside the kitchen, you followed the birds on the clothesline or bird feeder, knowing them all, and when they left to fly south, and when they returned, as if 5 children were not enough to watch over, as if the birds gave you the easier children to love, through the window, beyond arm's reach, needing just enough food from you to satisfy your nurturing impulse. And how easy to laugh about their quarrels, the blue jay squawking all the chickadees away from the bird feeder you had just filled, and then calling to us to come see them and join you in your delight. And now I want to say thank you. From you I learned how to hold my children with love, through their crying with sorrow or rage, and to sing to them and to ignore everything that needed to be done when it was that sacred time for reading aloud and sharing the magic and glory of language. I want to say thank you also for letting me go barefoot all summer, even as my feet turned black. For insisting I go without a t-shirt, bare-chested like my brothers until I was 10 years old. For playing rivers and dams with us when snow was melting down the sides of our dirt road. For the songs you sang in the kitchen with June as Dad and Richard played their guitars. I think of you now with your springing step, how your eyes lit up as my children entered the room, the gifts you made, the gifts you purchased with love, and the gifts you gave us just by being in our life one day at a time. And today and forever, I will hear your voice exclaiming over the marvels of what is unfolding before me one day at a time. So that was my 8 minutes. We will hear from my sister Brianna next.
Hello. Can everyone hear me? Yeah, okay. So I too want to say thank you. It's very touching for me to see such a loving and generous and warm and kind community. I'm from away, I'm in Annapolis. And I was here for 2 weeks with my dad towards the end of his life, and here really just 24 hours before my mom passed. But it was just so touching and so gave me such hope to see all the love pouring towards my family and my sisters who were here doing the day-to-day care. But also as the time drew close to their end, it's just very impressive. So thank you. So for those of you who don't know me, I am Skip and Joe Pendleton's daughter, Brianna Luna Pendleton. Many of you also know me as Sally Pendleton. The confusion of names is an affliction I inherited from my father. I use the word affliction fondly because I have come to cherish this piece of history that I share with my father. My father, James Francis Pendleton, selected the name Skip when he was still in his teens, but clearly he was already on his way to forging his own unique path in the world, already establishing his identity as a trailblazer, which he did literally years later as a member of the Appalachian Trail Club, and more recently in his volunteer work with the Belfast Bay Watershed Coalition, establishing local hiking trails throughout Mid-Coast Maine. My father was a feisty and at times fierce man with unstoppable force of energy, vitality, and zest for living. He was also fiercely independent as both a thinker and a man of action. As a young girl, I was accustomed to waking up and seeing my father sitting in his reading chair, deeply immersed in reading, and with the kitchen wood stove lit, the oatmeal made, the barn animals fed. The complete works of Shakespeare, along with books by Albert Camus, Erich Fromm, Freud, Jung, Joseph Conrad, Joseph Campbell, light reading in the morning, 5:30, good way to start the day. It lay stacked next to his chair. His passion for reading never let up. The last book, as my sister mentioned, he was reading up to the very last days of his life, was Nietzsche, thus spoke Zarathustra. My sisters and I chuckled over finding this in his walker. He insisted on having it with him, even though the cancer that had spread to his brain made it nearly impossible for him to read a page before tiring and falling asleep. In grieving the loss of my father, a longing has awakened in me to know him, not just as my father, but as a man of the world. In this mood of longing and sorrow, I came across my father's tattered and faded copy of Fromm's Escape from Freedom. I have a distinct memory of having a conversation with my father about this book. I recall being fascinated and disturbed by my father's assertion that human beings do not want to be free, that most people feign a desire for freedom, but in actuality seek creature comforts instead. A highlighted and underlined passage from my dad's copy of the book captures the essence of what I think my father wanted me to understand, and perhaps would most want all of you to understand as well. Freedom, though it has brought modern man independence and rationality, has made him isolated and thereby anxious and powerless. This isolation is unbearable, and the alternative he is confronted with are either to escape from the burden of his freedom into new dependencies and submission, or to advance to the full realization of positive freedom, which is based upon the uniqueness and individuality of man. My father also quoted Freud, repeating the familiar Freudian axiom that humans are driven by unconscious drives to seek pleasure and avoid pain. It was from these kinds of conversations with my father that my interest in the workings of the mind first began, and eventually led to my becoming a clinical psychologist and psychoanalyst, to which I am immensely grateful. And I want to say thank you, Dad, and thank you, Mom, because behind every great man is an exceptional woman, and I owe everything to them. In many ways, my father could be thought of as a modern man struggling with the problem of freedom. He was determined to remain true to himself and remain steadfast in his commitment to fashion a life guided by values and philosophical principles that made sense to him. In this way, my father was also a pragmatic man. He understood that knowledge alone is not enough. A person has a moral obligation to act upon what he or she knows. I now see how my father's life and the life he and my mother created together reflect these existential ideals. For example, long before it was fashionable, my parents chose to live off the land, to heat the house by wood, and to be as self-sufficient as possible. We grew up reading books instead of watching television. Our parents warned us about the evils of television at a time when television watching was becoming a popular family activity. And to this day, all us kids have like a blanket over the television and lift it only once in a while, special occasions. My parents gave my brother Andrew permission to travel across country alone and stay in a Zen center when he was only 15 years old. My sister Bindi was encouraged to skip school for 2 weeks and go hiking on the Appalachian Trail. While still in high school, my brother Tom's interest in social issues led him to establish a youth center and coffee house, a gathering place for young people to talk about current events. As for my sister Denise, her passion for literature and development as a poet grew from a family culture of reading. And for me, my transatlantic crossing with my father in a 38-foot sailboat from Belfast to Cork, Ireland, is another example of how my father's notion of freedom impacted my life and the lives of so many who had the good fortune of knowing him. My father embraced the existential call to use one's imaginal mind to create a life worth living. He earned a living doing work he didn't love, but this did not diminish his pursuit of freedom. I believe my father's freedom was rooted in his courage to dream big, pleasure in learning, pursuit of new interests, a love for challenges, raising 5 kids on a farm, heating a house by wood, and most importantly, a deep appreciation and respect for freedom. His recognition of the darker aspects of life and of human beings did not deter him from giving his whole self to whatever task was at hand, nor cause him to retreat from the world and neglect his existential responsibility to contribute to the community in which his life and the life of his family was embedded. I will close with a psychoanalytic idea about the presence of absence. Today, I feel the presence of my parents' absence, and I will surely feel their absence even more exquisitely when the music begins and they're not on the dance floor twirling. Yet I believe their presence is felt by all of us gathered here today, and in this way, each of us holds bits and pieces of Skip and Joe inside of us. So let us dance with gusto and glee and gladness in our hearts, for that is surely what they would most want on this day. Thank you.
Well, thank you so much, everyone, for coming. These are the grandkids. I'm the oldest. I'm Abby. Before I start, everyone maybe say your name.
I'm Rosemary. I'm Lila.
I'm Audrey. I'm Babette.
Luke. And Cy.
So we know Joe and Skip as Nana and Skip. And their legacy, I think, is felt very strongly in all of us. We have all had the blessing and the experience of also being raised by them. They were very much a part of what raised us as who we are today and who I think we will become. So they leave a legacy for all of us that we're very fortunate to have, and I think for all of you too. And that legacy is one of enthusiasm and passion. It's one of adventures. It's one of community responsibility, of acknowledgement, of passion for the adventures and for your adventures and our adventures. It's one for the curiosity of the unknown and for the exploration of the other, of that which we are not. We remember them together at Crocker Road or at the Blue Roof, which is where they passed and they lived most recently. We remember them in Monday night suppers. We remember Skip in the woodpile, listening to opera, full blast, reading Orwell in his chair, falling asleep after dinner, or at the dinner table once in a while. We remember him rollerblading. Who gets a grandfather that teaches you to rollerblade? We remember whitewater kayaking with him. I think only 2 of us can successfully Eskimo roll, but I'm still working on it. And most of all, his appreciation for the outdoors, for nature, and the respect for the land, the mountains, the sky, and the people that raised us in this community. And Nana is our caregiver. Nana had an excitement for life that I think we all carry forward. Her appreciation of small treasures, of those little joys and those surprises in life. The fireflies, she would tuck us in. We remember her singing us stories, rubbing us our backs. We remember her cooking pancakes in the morning, and always telling us everything was going to be all right. She would take us out in the backfield and play in the rivers and the streams with us and catch pollywogs. She taught us to bake. She taught us to garden. She taught us to care for one another and for our community. And I think that's a big legacy that Nana and Skip have taught us, to care for one another and to care for the land that we live on and to care for this community. So thank you all for being here. I think my sister's going to come up next. And yeah.
Hi, so I'm Lila, I'm Abby's sister. I was going to sing a song, and I can't stop crying, so I don't think I'm going to sing. But I will tell you the song and what it is and what it means to us. So the song is Fever by Peggy Lee. And I know that this is like a really sad time that we're all coming together, but Nana and Skip were full of, parties and dancing and laughter and this beautiful zest for life. A lot of folks have already kind of talked about what they filled our lives with. And for me, one of the most meaningful things that they gave me was not only the stuff that happened in my childhood, or constantly being there, teaching me how to bake and whitewater kayak and all the above. But I have been through some really hard stuff in my life, and as an adult, and they just showed me unconditional love. And I think the most touching card that they sent me was one that is a Louisa May Alcott quote, that I'm not afraid of storms, for I'm learning how to sail my ship. And Nana and Skip gave all of this generation and their children those lessons, that life gets really hard sometimes, and there's insurmountable obstacles at times. But if you listen and you learn, then nothing is too much to overcome. And that's pretty much all I'm going to say. No, I'm okay.
Yes, next we'll have Vanita. I think she'll introduce herself. Will you? Vanita Robertson, I think she'll tell you why she's singing here. Thank you, Vanita. Do you want me to introduce you? Vanita is the Robertsons. My mother's best friend was Vanita's mother, June Robertson, and I referred to her in a poem. She and June and my mom would sing in the kitchen while Vanita's dad, Richard, and my father, in one of his iterations, one of his things was to play a guitar for a while, and I think at one point he realized he would never be anywhere near as good as Richard, so he put the guitar aside. But fortunately, Vanita inherited the music from her father and her mother, and all the girls in that family have remained very, very close friends. And Vanita, I know, had a special connection with my mother, so I'm so glad you can be here.
That's a really good introduction. One thing I can add to that is when they were I don't remember, but a story goes that when they had parties and did all this, I was a little baby. I was in on the bed sleeping at the house, and they put pillows beside me so I wouldn't fall off. Anyway, this song I started learning in the summer. It's an old jazz tune. It says in your program that I wrote it. I didn't. I didn't write anything. I just learned it. I hope I can sing it. I hope I learned it. And it's a song about a letter. The name of it's P.S. I Love You. And Jo was a big letter writer, and I really loved her letters. And I loved... I'm going to try to do this. Dear, I thought I'd drop a line. The weather's cool. The folks are fine. See? The folks are fine. I'm in bed each night by 9. Forgot where to go. P.S. I love you. I mean, I knew where the words were, but I didn't know where the chords were. Yesterday we had some rain, but all in all, I can't complain. She would say that. Was it dusty on the train? P.S. I love you. Right to the Browns, just as soon as you're able. They came around to call. I burned a hole in the dining room table. Let me see, I guess that's all. Nothing more for me to say, and so I'll close. Oh, by the way, everybody's thinking of you. P.S. I love you.
Thank you. Next, we will hear from Glenn Whitmer.
Thank you, Denise, and thank you for inviting me to be here. It's a great honor to speak about Skip. He was a person who meant a lot to me, and I was inspired by him and the time that we get to spend together. I first met Skip at a Bicycle Coalition of Maine bike rally in Bath back in 2001. My brother-in-law and I had volunteered to lead a century ride, and it would take all day to do this ride. There were about 12 people on that ride, one of whom was an older gentleman on an Aegis bicycle who had a dapper mustache and a long trail of orange flagging tied to his helmet that would flow in the wind behind him when he rode. We had all day to get to know each other, but about an hour into the ride, Skip's rear derailleur cable broke. And I thought, oh, it's very unfortunate. I'm not going to get a chance to know this man because he's going to have to turn back. And this just is an indication of how little I knew Skip at that point, because you can probably tell where this story is going. Obviously, I hadn't learned who he was, and what he did is he grabbed that rear derailleur cable and he pulled it taut so that the rear derailleur was in the middle gear in the back of his bike, and he took the broken cable and he wrapped it around the bicycle cage, or the water bottle cage on his frame, effectively giving himself 2 gears. He had the front gear, the front 2 gears in the front of the bike, and that was it. And he climbed back on his bike, and he rode the next 85 miles like that with just 2 gears. That in itself impressed me, the ingenuity to figure out how to solve this problem, and the belief that he could keep going. But what really impressed me was not only they rode the 100 miles with only 2 gears, seemingly unfazed by the fact that they only had 2 gears, but I think that in reflecting upon it now, that Skip actually relished the extra challenge of having only 2 gears and having to deal with the adversity of that broken cable. Back then, Kim and I were living out of the state, but Skip and I exchanged phone numbers, and we'd get together to go on rides when we were visiting Kim's parents in Waldo County. A couple of years later, Kim and I moved to Montville and began to settle down. We built a house, started a family. I didn't have the time for the long, idyllic bike rides anymore, but did find time to go for hikes whenever I could, either alone or with my growing family. I kept running into Skip on these hikes, and we reunited that way. This was at the point where Skip was actively scouting out the Little River Trail route. I started teaching middle school at Troy Howard Middle School, and on one of those occasions when I ran into Skip in the woods, we started to talking about opportunities for the kids to get involved in some of the trail building projects. We began planning the trail, where the trail would go with the middle school students from the airport, across the road, around the YMCA, through the middle school, and over to the Hutchinson Center. Skip and worked with my students to kind of figure out how to do this, and he was always there leading them, showing them how to use the loppers, and explaining to them the finer points of building trail. Skip was not only a huge inspiration to me through this work together, but he also inspired a number of middle school students. And he inspired the students that took to Skip were the kids who were most in need of inspiration. They were the kids that didn't do real well in the classroom. And this opportunity to get outside with this older gentleman was a huge boon to them. Skip's willingness, while in his 70s, to work with middle school students all day long and remain patient is just one of the many remarkable things about Skip and one of my fondest memories of him. And he did a lot more work than that with the middle school students. Molly was talking to me earlier and said, remember when we went and marked all the storm drains downtown so that everybody would know where the storm drains were and how they led to the sea? And he did that with our students too. He did a lot with the middle school students. I mentioned running into Skip in the woods a number of times. Now, I know there's no person in Waldo County that you'd be more likely to run into in the woods than Skip. However, I do think it is unusual to have found myself encountering Skip out in the woods as many times as I did. One time, it was a cold November day with a light coating of snow, and my friend Roy and I were out mountain biking, and we'd stopped down at the edge of the airport to kind of reconnoiter and figure out where we were. And there was we were on an old logging trail. There were no other trails around, and there was a rustling in the woods. and out of the trees stepped Skip. He just emerged from the trees. What were the chances that our paths would cross that day? I like to think that there is a bit of fortunate destiny at play in the fact that my path and Skip's path would cross a number of times. All of us here today are fortunate to have had those paths crossing with Skip's and Joe's, and that is what has brought us all here together today. During this week of Thanksgiving, that is one of the things I'm especially thankful for. The last thought I'd like to share also has to do with intersecting pathways. I heard from Chloe that Skip was not well. I contacted Bendy and Denise, and they told me that I could come say goodbye that day. I'd ridden my bike to work in the morning and was planning on riding out to Monroe to meet my family at my son's soccer game after school. I thought that saying goodbye to Skip in the midst of a day of bike riding was fitting. I rode down Miller Street and remember distinctly thinking, which way should I go to get there? Should I go down by the bay or should I cut through town? I decided to turn and ride by the post office and just happened to run into two young men. And when Denise was reading her poem, I just realized there's even more significance to this than I thought at the time. Two young men that were on the second to last day of a cross-country bike trip, and those of you who know Skip know that he rode his bike across the United States a couple of times. I had a short conversation with these two as we biked through town. They had covered quite a few miles, spending the whole summer crossing the country. They remarked that there were a lot of hills in Waldo County. They had had a great ride, but they were tired and ready for the journey to be over. We rode together through downtown and up to the driveway of Skip and Joe's house, where I bid them happy travels as they headed toward the final day of their journey. I shared this encounter with Skip as I thought he would appreciate the story of cross-country bikers at the end of their ride, fulfilled and ready for the realization of their journey. Thank you.
I'm Molly Schaffler, and thanks for inviting me to speak here. I have a tribute that I put together for Joe and Skip. Many of us gathered here have recollections and stories to share of times we spent with Skip and with Joe. They were both stellar individuals who each in their own way leave an indelible contribution to what defines this community. Skip was very much the outer face of what Denise referred to as the Skip and Joe package. Joe was perhaps more the inner yin part, an anchor at home, tending the garden. But they were a unit, and it is fitting that we are here today to remember them both together. Early encounters with Skip and Joe are at the very edge of my memory when they used to sail to Bard Island. They came ashore, they visited, they remembered my parents, and I have no idea when this time was. Many years later, I leaned on Skip's knowledge of Waldo County and its landowners to scope out priority conservation projects for the Coastal Mountains Land Trust when they extended their region to include the Belfast Bay watershed. We spent many hours exploring hidden corners of Waldo County, marshes, streams, mountaintops. As many of you know, being in the woods with Skip was an adventure itself. We often started on skis and ended on skates. We followed icy streams I would not have dared to skate on. We sometimes came back after sunset. We usually way overspent our planned time. Skip was never lost, and when we came back late, Joe was never worried. When we pulled together the first Belfast Bay Watershed Coalition board, sometime around, I think it was 2005, Skip became the founding president. Skip, Alden Johnson, and I usually convened at Skip and Joe's house to prepare the budget and to coordinate administrative details. Joe usually contributed more commentary than Skip did at these meetings, and she deserves recognition as a key part of the BBWC board, too. With the formation of the BBWC, many antics followed, many of which Glenn has recounted, including the storm drain stenciling with the 6th grade red team at Troy Howard, mapping routes for trails, negotiating permission with landowners, moving materials in during winter for bog bridges, then cutting trails and building bridges in summer, maintaining trails, inviting community participation in the design of watershed road signs, which are still around the watershed today. Securing Belfast rangeways, working with John Holmes and DEP to mitigate drainage problems along the Little River Trail. Working with the city for pedestrian and bicycle-friendly streets and roads. All of us in this room have rallied under Skip's leadership on one or another of these projects over the years. A high point for me was the day we had the official opening of the Little River Trail. Many of you were probably there. And we gathered at the parking lot by the ball field. And on cue, Glenn and Kelly's students from Troy Howard came out of the woods from the trail across the field with these poles with banners and streamers, and it was just this most amazing view of these kids coming out down the trail across the field, and the sun was shining. It was I can't remember what time of year it was, but it was really great community event. So we have all run into Skip and Joe around town, whether it's senior college at the Hutchinson Center on Thursdays, Skip shopping at the co-op, running into Joe at the Fertile Mind bookshop or the Left Bank, Joe or at the farmer's market, seeing them together at Belfast summer nights, passing Joe in her garden on Bridge Street, passing Skip with a boat on his car headed off to a river somewhere, Joe knitting during the BBWC meetings. One Thursday, a senior college day, I was in my office at the Hutchinson Center, and Joe pokes her head in my door and handed me a pair of socks that she just finished knitting. Joe and Skip, well, they were ever present and central in the fabric of Belfast, avid supporters of many things, and they were generous with their capacity for caring and doing good work. So Skip and Joe together, and each in their own ways, have helped define the spirit and vibrancy of this community. I grew up in a small town in Sandy Spring, Maryland. It's a small historic community with a vibrant spirit that has thrived through many generations and thrives today. And that it's often quietly said that Sandy Spring is not a place, but a state of mind. And that can very much be said about this community here. Skip and Joe embodied that state of mind, which ties so many of us together and moves us forward in the good work that we do and will continue to do. We will carry on. And we'll miss them. Here's a poem that was given to me when my mother died. I don't know who wrote it, but it's fitting here. Memory can tell us only what we were in company with those we loved. It cannot help us find what each of us alone must now become. Yet no one is really alone. Those who live no more echo still within our thoughts and words. And what they did is part of what we have become. To miss, indeed, is to love.
Thank you so much, Glenn and Molly. Those were wonderful. So we have time to hear from other community members who want to share a few memories. We started late, so I'm going to make an executive decision and say we can take maybe 10 minutes to hear from people if we want before Heart Song begins. If anyone wants to share a story, please come up here because we're being videoed for those who cannot be here, including my brother from Hawaii. And so we have Mike Hurley in line, I see, so come on up.
Right up to the front, thank you. I first met Skip and Joe when I was part of a Belfast Cafe and Art Fellows Gallery, and I didn't know their historical roots, so I would see this elegant couple with silver hair, and the fellow would be wearing a sport jacket and a beret, and I was sure that they were like retirees from somewhere down Delmarva Peninsula. And then one day I'm walking along and there's a CMP truck working on a pole, and I look up and it's Skip, and I'm, whoa, guess he's not retired. And I got to see a lot of them. I knew Skip a lot better than I know Joe. And one time we had this, I'm pretty sure it was a thing we called tropical bop, which we had a band. It was a kind of a jungle themed dance party in the cafe. And I don't know how many drinks Skip had, but by the peak of the evening, he had torn up 2 slats off the chair, and he was beating them on a table. That was pretty memorable. So he had a lot of energy. And I saw his energy at work many, many times. He was very political. He would, I don't think you would have had to ask him what he thought about Donald Trump. He was always the guy who was out not just helping people put signs up, but immediately that night out there taking them down. And you were really hard put to find a sign that he had not already taken down. I think one thing remarkable, well, I'll just say, I'm a volunteer for Coastal Mountains Land Trust also, and they sent out a note and they said, you should go check the trails. This was after the last storm, the big storm a couple weeks ago, which I thought that meant bring your tools and clean it. But no, that's not what they meant. They meant go look, because you're supposed to take a chainsaw safety course and have somebody with you and have all the proper tools with you, none of which I did. And so I was out there, cut all the trees, and I had thought, what would Skip do? And that's exactly what he would have done. And then I got a lecture from Coastal Mountains who said, don't do that. That's what Skip Pendleton would do. And so one time I went out with Skip on the Little River Trail, and it was about a foot of snow. And if you ever went with Skip anywhere, he was like walking after a rabbit. He's like on the move. And we come to these hills, these just short, steep hills along that river. And where I would be very daintily trying to sidestep my way down, Skip would run down them. And I think later I came to really appreciate the Pendletons and the Pendleton family in a historic sense for the community of Belfast, how important they've been as a sort of the deep roots of family members. So many people like me came here years ago or recently, and but the Pendletons have been here a long time, and based on their breeding habits, it's looked like they're going to be here a while. And that really meant a lot to Belfast. Anytime Skip got up to speak, people really listened. A very respected voice. So I think of Skip running ahead. And a lot of times, you follow people, and like all of a sudden you realize that the crowd ahead is getting thinner. Maybe you're getting up to the front of the line. But I think Skip and Joe, obviously, and the whole Pendleton family, real inspirations of community activity, community leadership. And I'm just going to close really quick. I wasn't even going to bring this up, but somebody mentioned the storm drains that the Watershed Coalition and Skip went out and did the, and after he died this summer, we happened to see these like storm drains. These are like professional storm drains. So we're working on one, and you'll have an opportunity to be fundraised for these. And it says, Skip P. says, no dumping, drains to our bay. And these will be going on all the storm drains around town. So, thank you.
I'm Paul Carlson, and I want to talk about Skip and Joe as neighbors. In 2001, I bought a project on Front Street, a house to fix up. And to buy the house, I had to buy a vacant lot above it on Bridge Street, right below the blue roof of Skip and Joe. Now, that upper lot was a challenge. It had a U-shaped driveway. Driving through it meant scraping your car with Japanese knotweed and ragweed. From that lot, I couldn't see the harbor. Clearing that guaranteed acceptance by my neighbors under the blue roof. And many fun times were spent taming the knotweed that we locally call bamboo. They said it couldn't be done. It requires perseverance. I can see Jo coming down in a neighborly way with her plastic toboggan with plants that she had thinned from her own garden, saying, well, these might look good here, or that might look good over there. But oh, look at that tree so close to your house with branches hanging over the roof. Not good. I'm going to send Skip down. Skip came with tools and skills and even allowed me to assist as he threw lines over branches before cutting them and removed all the threatening limbs. Not only got them to the ground, but cut them up to firewood length. Good times visiting, good times sharing meals. Neighbors like that you just don't find many places. Jo especially was my security system with her binoculars. And Jo was quick to call when she saw certain cars in my yard because she wanted to greet that person or ask a question. One morning I went out, not fully clad, but fortunately my back door has a bank before getting up to the Bridge Street lot and a huge boulder, so Jo only saw that I was out there, not how I was attired. And I heard the phone ring as I was going back in the house, and she called immediately saying, oh, I happened to see you're up, and I was wondering. Now, the one time they failed to sound the alert was when a former student of mine from Presque Isle and friends of his decided to cycle from Fort Kent to Kittery. And I wasn't home at the moment they arrived. And when I did get home, I discovered several bikes in my basement. Former student had taken a credit card and gotten my back door open and gotten into the house. And no suspicion on Joe's part because these guys were dressed like bikers. I'm going to miss them dearly. I treasure the memories. Neighbors like none other could be. Thanks, Skip and Joe.
This really won't take as long as it looks. But while most of you knew Joe and Skip, I'm Judy Flagg Evans, and I lived next door to them growing up. I probably was 11, 12 years old when the Pendletons moved next door on Crocker Road. And talk about great neighbors growing up. They were like my and my brother's second mom and dad, and my mom and dad were the kids' mom and dad. But I was the babysitter. 5 kids. Thank you. I do deserve that here. And more, quite frankly. No, No, he will never clap. But growing up next door to the Pendletons from the time I was 11 or 12 and my brother was 5 or 6, they became a huge part of who we would become later in life. It taught me how to wear many hats and to manage many people. I was not chief cook, but I was the chief bottle washer. Babysitter, remember, 5 kids to feed and bathe and get them to bed, and we always read stories every night. I was the activities planner, tobogganing down the hill and making it more dangerous by taking a couple of bales of hay and packing it under one of the rises so we could almost bend the toboggan as we would shoot over it in half as we flew through the air. And the timing had to be right so that we could bail out before we hit the trees. And one time we had to be really bored, and I truly don't ever remember being bored, but there was some construction going on in the neighborhood, and Tommy knows the story. Maybe it was your idea, Tommy. I'm going to blame you anyway. And we decided that we were always either having a lemonade stand, but this day, I guess, we were too bored to do that, so we decided to take green apples and put them on the end of willow sticks and try, as the trucks would go by, we would try to hit the body. Truly, it was to hit the body. However, somebody shot a very good aim, and it went into the cab of the truck. And we still don't know who did it to this day. But anyway, we paid for it. But the truck, of course, came to a screeching halt and backed up, and we scattered like you have never seen. But it didn't take long for Joe to come out, and I don't know if my mother was called, but anyway, we were sat down and reprimanded. I don't remember our punishment, but we didn't take the green apples anymore and decide. There are so many memories. We were allowed to be free spirits at the Pendleton house. I wore the teacher hat for hours with a wall of chalkboard in the living room. Hairdresser, how many times did I braid your hair, Bindi? I could do it in my sleep. I was taskmaster. Sorry, TJ. He was the brunt of that. I could boss him around, and he didn't like that. I was the only one. I was the arts director. No TV, none. With putting on plays in the barn, charging our mothers and whoever else was around, and had a dime for admission. And when left babysitting, there was dancing to jazz records. I think we played the song In the Mood until it wore out. I did get my love for big band music from the Pendletons. Hey, but we learned to dance. We hooked Chubby, a pony the Pendletons were boarding for a cousin, and earned his name, thus Chubby, to the sleigh, and went for miles around and around the fields, or Skip would hook up the hay wagon, and down the road we'd go. He was driving, thank goodness. Chubby did not like a saddle and would only run when we turned him around to go back home. Chubby only wanted to do what earned him his name. Joe would give me cooking lessons. Sorry, Joe, I brought store goods tonight for my contribution. I felt guilty as I picked them up. Taught me how to iron meticulously. Joe was very meticulous about her ironing. To change diapers. And when I stuck one of the babies, sorry, Andy, I think it was you, I cried more than Andy did, or Sally. It was one of the two, because I remember when they both were brought home as babies from the hospital. But Joe taught me how to change the diaper, to put the pin in and put my finger behind the diaper so that I would prick me and not the baby. And I never did it again to them. They would leave me and one of my girlfriends. They had to be desperate to go out, to watch over the clan while they took a night out. Desperate, I think, to trust us enough, sometimes almost burning the house down, with the old-fashioned popcorn popper over the electric stove and putting wood in the wood fireplace in the cellar. Christmas Eve, I would go up and help Joe wrap all the presents after they came home from church. That's when they brought the tree in. That's when I became an expert at gift wrapping. I watched Skip teach himself how to play the guitar, getting the rhythm by getting his leg going first before he would start strumming the guitar. But he achieved it, or something near to it. If Joe and Skip held a gathering and guests stayed too long into the evening and they were tired, they simply said goodnight and asked whoever was last to leave to turn out the lights. And for all I did, Joe and Skip did more. My brother Ken and I were up to the Pendletons probably more than we were home. She took us to the beach at Bayside at the Browns, where we would go at 3 p.m, the safe time, and not come home until dark. Joe would swim in the ocean with ease, no matter how cold. She always claimed it was great. She was the most optimistic person I knew. She gave out homemade popcorn balls at Halloween. She would cut my hair. That was in turn for all my babysitting. No charge. And would patient to teach me to cook. Although looking back, I think there was a method to her madness. Maybe I could add chief cook to my resume after all. We were so blessed to have a childhood near the Pendletons, to have all of this growing up and into my adult life. I love them both and I'll miss them very much. The Pendletons, after all, are family. I was fortunate enough, Bindi texted me to let me know Joe's condition, and a few days before she passed. So I gathered my mom and we went down and I was able to thank her.
Thank you, Judy. That was really wonderful. And Mike and Paul. And I'd love to hear so many more stories and look forward to hearing them over the potluck. And I know in the days and weeks that follow, stories on the streets and in the co-op. And I really enjoy them. I know we have Heart Song coming up next for 3 songs, I believe. And Missy, can you introduce yourself? I know Heart Song is a group of community singers, and I'll just say, as those of you who may have heard this, but they both came to sang to both of our parents. And it was a blessing. My father was totally alert. I mean, it was wonderful that they knew a lot of the singers. And my father was in his hospital bed, and they came into his bedroom, and all the family was there to hear too. And he was halfway to heaven by then, but he still knew them, and the singing really helped lift him, I know. And with my mother, they came and sang, and she passed within 2 hours after they stopped singing, and she especially showed a strong response to Swing Low, Sweet Chariot. That just perked her right up. And I think they helped her move on to the heavenly spheres. And I'm so glad they can be here tonight to help us celebrate their life.
I'll just say with the microphone that we are Heart Song. Our primary mission is to sing at bedside for those that are dying, or sometimes just those that need a little comfort or cheering up. And we were very honored to be able to sing for both, as Denise said, for both Skip and Joe. And we are going to sing 2 songs that we sang for them. The first one is called Crossing the Bar, and it's the musical version of Alfred Lord Tennyson's poem that he wrote back in the late 1800s. This is for Skipper Skip, and his mate, Joe. And the second one is called To My Old Brown Earth, which was written by Pete Seeger. And it's more what we think of as their relationship, their melding with the earth. And then we'll teach you all a song.
now, we would like to include you into what we do. And we'd like you to sing a song. It's called Let the Life I Live. And we also sang this for them. And it seems very fitting because it's Let the Life I Live Speak for Me. And so we'll go through it once. Let the life I live speak for me. Let the life I live speak for me. When I come to the end of the road, I lay down my heavy load. The life I live speak for me. So, and then the next, there's three other verses. May the friends I've made speak for me. May the work I've done speak for me. And may the love I've shared speak for me. So we'll sing it once, just so you know what the tune is, and then join in as you feel able. Let the life I live speak for me. Let the life I live speak for me. When I come to the end of this road, and I lay down my heavy load, let the life I live speak for me. So that's the first verse. Go for it. Let the life I live speak for me. Let the life I live speak for me. When I come to the end of this road, and I lay down my heavy load, let the life I live speak for me. The friends I've made. Let the friends I've made speak for me. Let the friends I've made speak for me. When I come to the end of this road, and I lay down my heavy load, let the friends I've made speak for me. Let the work I've shared. Let the work I've shared speak for me. Let the work I've shared speak for me. When I come to the end of this road, and I lay down my heavy load, let the work I've shared speak for me. Let the love I've shared. Let the love I've shared speak for me. Let the love I've shared speak for me. When I come to the end of this road, and I lay down my heavy load, let the love I've shared speak for me.
So it's very fitting that song precedes what I wanted to share, you know, as the siblings got together to plan this evening, this event. I said what I want to do is to thank the community and to verbalize and let you all know that Denise and I couldn't have done this by ourselves.
without knowing that we had the community at our backs. People were bringing food. They fixed our doors when they busted. One night, just a couple nights before Dad, when we were doing tons of washing all the time, a pipe burst, 11 o'clock at night. People watering our plants. It's just, and the care providers too, like we were so gifted that we were able to have the same continuity, the same great care for both of our parents as they passed, and for us, like I felt like, oh boy, I know what this is going to be like. When you go through something like that, you want to know who you're with. So we were very thankful for that. Just on and on. It's like we even had, it took us a few days. Like at first when we were planning this, we thought, oh, for sure Mom would hang on, like towards the end. And so we debated, like it was a couple days of debate, like, are we going to go through with this event or not? And I was like, of course we're going to. Like, Dad didn't didn't raise us to turn back. Unless it was really dire consequences of, real serious physical harm. But for the most part, you just went with it. So that's what we're doing. And I assumed that the community would go with it, whatever happened. And so I'm really thankful, and I had to twist people's arms. They didn't understand the family that's helping us set up. You got to set out more chairs. You got to set out more chairs. And they're like, no. Because they didn't understand. The ones that weren't living here didn't understand. We know that. I would see it always. So anyways, I'm just very thankful to be living in a community like this, and it makes the whole community stronger for this. So that's not anything money can buy. So anyways, let me check my notes. Oh, the other thing is we were thankful to have, I was thankful, I'm sure other people were, that we had friends who were nurses. I had a lot of friends that were nurses. So that was a big plus. They would, sometimes they might not accept money, or most of the time they wouldn't accept any money, but they'd come and check on the family, or they allowed that Tom and I could go away this summer. We had planned this, or the Hatches had planned this trip for us to be up in the White Mountains for a few days, and I felt like I could go because I knew I had nurses who had also been through this with their family. So that was helpful to have that. The band. I know it wasn't easy for Ando to scrape together the band. So thanks a lot for that. We're really looking forward to that. And as you were able to hear Heart Song, it was very nice to be able to have that into your home. It wasn't just for the parents, it was for the family too. And so I would encourage anybody that, is experiencing something like this at home or in the hospital, in the nursing homes, they go to all those places. It leaves a very healing presence for everybody. So, anyways, and for Ned, extended brother-in-law to Denise, up there filming it for those that couldn't watch, who couldn't be here. Because I know there's a lot of close friends, as you know, like Chloe, she's very close to the whole family, but they had to be away. A lot of close friends had to be away. But the ending point is Dad and Mom would want us all to enjoy this evening. So let's go do it.
All right, everybody get your thumbs together. Well, thumbs and fingers.
decided long ago.
Here you go.
Romeo and Juliet. Juliet, she felt the same. When he put his arms around her, he said, Julie, baby, you're my flame. Let's get that fever. When we kiss it, fever with that flame in you. Fever, I'm on fire. Fever, yeah, I burn for you. Pocahontas had a very mad affair. When her daddy tried to kill him, she said, Daddy, oh, don't you dare give me fever. With his kisses, fever when he holds me tight. Fever, I'm his missus. Daddy, won't you treat him right? Now listen to my story, and here's the poem that I have made. Chicks who won't give you fever, their Fahrenheit or centigrade will give you fever. When we kiss them, fever if you live and learn. Fever, sizzle, what a lovely way to burn. Lovely way to burn. What a lovely way to burn. What a lovely way to burn.
Nice job. Thank you, Lila.